wisely, the islanders have built the village here on the good side of the rock, so here wouldn't be so windy. I think it has calmed down the wind, but this morning it was really windy up there and it was calm down here. So this also tells us that the weather can change very fast. So, Utö are many islands, all these peninsulas, and here, this Chesnes southern peninsula is actually an ice age formation. Here we have the ridges of one of the Salpausselkä formations from the ice age that we can follow in Finland. And here it starts, continues with Jurmo and then on to the mainland. And here, when you go behind the church, if you haven't gone and look closely to this meadow here, you can see here is a lovely ancient shoreline where the stones have been put by the ice and the shoreline like an amphitheater. So it's not just the Romans and the Greeks, even the nature can make an amphitheater. So here were pirates, and they were shore pirates. They came out this season of fishing, especially in the dark sailing period from September, late September until early December, and they could then lure ships to come to wrong waters, and then they could take those cargoes. So the merchants of Turku, they really didn't like this, and then in 1753 the first lighthouse was standing here, round tower, and it was super modern. Only the Swedish lighthouses were using a light hut in those days. It was made out of wood, and there was mirrors in front of the ocean facing sides, and there from the ceiling were 10 oil lamps or 6 oil lamps hanging from the ceiling, and then there was a board with metal mirror plates, and when they saw lights or at dusk ships coming up the horizon, then they went up to light them and stood there and switched this board back and forth so they could get the reflection. And outside of the tower on the water route side, they put a basket about that size that is here on the south side of the lighthouse, and there they had the fixed light, and soon as the blinking light started to burn next to the fixed light, then they could know that this was Utö lighthouse. So those who tried to lure the ships with just a fixed light, they couldn't continue with this pirating anymore, and they had to just be fishermen with hard work. In my days, when I was little, 50 years ago soon, then still there was these old men and women were still alive from that time, when every single straw of grass was really valuable. So you couldn't go and play on any important land. But at the most here have been 27 animals grazing freely. So everything was used except for those yards that always were fenced. So there on their own yard they could perhaps grow a little bit of potato, but still all the potato and the grains and then the hay had to be bought here. Especially if you had some sheep, you perhaps had 1 or 2 just to get the meat and so on. So trees have been very important because there were none. Anyhow, here the traditional pilot home families were here, because in the 1600s 2 of the fishing homesteads out of 6 on Jurmo, they got certain things that they could then get without taxes. They didn't have to pay taxes because they were taking care of ships to show the water route in towards Korpoström. And they moved here after the big Nordic wars, probably in the 1720s or 40s or 30s. But in 1747 map, here already are 2 windmills here on this rock, and then the 2 homesteads here. Later on, the following generation, they needed more pilots, so they divided these to 4, and they still owned the land and the water areas. So in 1936, then they divided the land to between each family. So they owned everything together, although the state took, or the crown the military and the maritime administration took land for their needs, though. And in 1915 then came the military, and then already this long pier had been built, and they then put rails here, and they built this cobblestone road and rails all the way through the village up here to this smaller battery, and then in 1916 they continued up here to ensure with heavy battery the entrance in towards Finland. And there we see those big casemates, and this was then used, so when people bought hay and bought, no, perhaps not hay, but wood for winter use, they brought them here, put them in the wagons and pushed them along the roads. So outside the fences there is at least a meter, because the logs were usually a meter long, so at least that much space between the fence and the road, so they could put the wood there, so they were using that as well. Here in the eastern part it was quite open, so the Russians decided that they used the houses that were here and also built some new ones, because in 1912 those who went with the pilots, we probably know that there was a pilot strike, and they wanted to oppose to the Russification, and the pilot elderly was changed into a Russian one, and instead they would be brought pilots from the Caspian Sea and the Baltic countries, and Finns here and the islanders, they laughed at them, but they couldn't last so very long, because these were sea captains. They knew how to navigate, and these charts were measured in 1860s, and they were really used 80 years later when they were made these maps onto the computer maps. So they were really good. So they continued doing the piloting, and the families had moved away in a protest and couldn't come back until 1918, after Finland had become independent in December 19.